You must marry that CEO.
Daddy, please, I cannot. He's a cruel man.
They say your wedding day is supposed to be the happiest day of your life. For Ani, it felt like a funeral. She stood before the altar in a dress she didn't choose, about to marry a man she thought she hated. The cruel, ruthless heir of the G family. Gihan, Mr. G, the devil CEO billionaire who controlled every breath she took, every step she made. The man who held her mother's ashes hostage. The man who trapped her in a gilded cage and called it protection. His eyes were cold as he watched her walk down that aisle, but there was something in them she couldn't quite read. Something that made her heart stutter, even as her mind screamed at her to run. She thought hell awaited her in this marriage. She had no idea he'd been loving her from the shadows for 7 years, dying a little more each day just to keep her alive. 7 years ago, Annie had been just a girl with dreams of becoming a jewelry designer, walking home from high school with a braided hair tie she'd made herself wrapped around her wrist. The night air had been cool and she'd been humming a song her mother used to sing to her, completely unaware that her entire life was about to change in the span of a few heartbeats. That was the night she met him. She didn't remember all the details. Trauma had a way of blurring the edges of memory, turning crystal clear moments into watercolor impressions. But she remembered the danger. She remembered the way fear wrapped around her throat like iron fingers when she realized she wasn't alone in that dark alley. She remembered thinking about her mother, about how she'd told her to always be careful, to always watch her surroundings. She remembered thinking she'd failed her. And then, him. A stranger who appeared from nowhere like an avenging angel, who threw himself between her and the blade meant for her heart. She remembered the sound of steel meeting flesh over and over again, 16 times. She counted each one as she screamed as she tried to pull him away, as his blood, so much blood, painted the ground beneath them. "Run," he told her, his voice surprisingly gentle despite the pain that must have been tearing through him. "Run and don't look back." But she couldn't move. She was frozen watching this stranger die for her, and all she could think was why? Why would someone sacrifice themselves for a girl they didn't even know? He reached up with a trembling hand and touched her face, his fingers leaving warmth against her cold skin. "You deserve to live," he whispered. "You deserve to chase your dreams." Then his hand fell and she thought she was certain that he was dead. She didn't remember much after that. The police, the hospital, the questions she couldn't answer. Her mother's terrified face when she found her. The way her mother held her so tight she could barely breathe, whispering prayers and promises that everything would be okay. But nothing was okay. Nothing would ever be okay again. They told her the man who saved her didn't survive. They told her to forget, to move on, to be grateful for her second chance at life. So she tried. She tried so hard to bury that night, to focus on her studies, on her jewelry designs, on building the future that stranger had died to give her. But sometimes, in her dreams, she still saw his face. She still heard his voice telling her she deserved to live. She still felt the ghost of his touch against her cheek. 6 years passed. Arnie's mother died, taken by an illness that ate away at her from the inside, leaving Annie alone in a world that suddenly felt too big and too dangerous. And that's when they came for her. The Guy family, with their wealth and power and secrets buried so deep that even they'd forgotten where some of them were hidden. The Gong family had been hunting her bloodline for decades, they explained. An ancient curse written in blood and sealed with sacrifice. Boys in their family needed the deaths of female family members to survive. Some twisted, dark magic that made monsters of men and victims of women. Her mother had known this. She'd spent her entire life running, hiding, protecting Annie from a fate she knew was coming. But now she was gone, and Annie was alone, and the Gong family had found her at last. The Guy family stepped in before the Gong family could claim her. They seized control of her life, confiscated everything she owned, including her mother's ashes, her keepsakes, the precious belongings that were all she had left of her. They moved her into their mansion, a sprawling estate that felt more like a prison than a home, all marble and gold and empty rooms that echoed with secrets. And then she met him, Gihan, the heir, the man who would become her husband, whether she wanted it or not. He was beautiful in the way dangerous things are beautiful, sharp edges and cold eyes and a presence that commanded every room he entered. When he looked at her, she felt naked, exposed, as if he could see every thought in her head and every fear in her heart. He never smiled. He never showed warmth. He simply existed like a force of nature, and she was caught in his gravity whether she liked it or not. "You'll stay here," he told her on that first day, his voice as cold as his expression. "You'll do as you're told. You'll marry me when the time comes. In return, you'll be protected from the Gong family. Your mother's ashes will be returned to you when I deem it appropriate." She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to fight, to run, to do anything but submit to this arrogant man who treated her like a possession rather than a person. But what choice did she have? The Gong family wanted her dead. The Gi family was her only protection, and Gihan was the price she had to pay for that protection. So she stayed, and she hated him. God, how she hated him. He controlled everything. Where she went, who she spoke to, what she wore. Guards followed her everywhere. Cameras watched her every move. When she tried to apply for the International Jewelry Design Competition, her one dream that had survived everything else, he denied her application 3 times before finally, grudgingly, allowing it. "Why do you even care?" she demanded after the 3rd rejection, storming into his office without permission, past his shocked assistant and his disapproving bodyguards. "Why does it matter if I enter a competition? Are you afraid I'll actually succeed? Afraid I'll become someone outside of your control?" He looked up from his papers, and for just a moment, just a heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes. Something that looked almost like pain. But then it was gone, replaced by that familiar ice. "The competition will put you in the public eye," he said calmly. "It will make you a target. The Gong family is still searching for you." "So what?" she shot back. "I'm supposed to just hide here forever? Give up everything I ever wanted because you decided my life isn't my own anymore?" He stood then, moving around his desk with a grace that shouldn't have been possible for a man his size. He stopped right in front of her, so close she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, so close she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that made her traitorous heart beat faster. "Your life is exactly your own," he said quietly. "That's why I'm protecting it." She didn't understand what he meant. She thought it was just more controlling nonsense, more justification for his tyranny. So she turned and left, slamming the door behind her hard enough that the sound echoed through the entire mansion. But he approved her application the next day. And when she entered the competition, he was there. Not obviously, he stayed in the shadows watching from a distance, but she could feel his eyes on her. Always watching, always present. The other contestants were talented, driven, hungry for success. Ani threw herself into her designs, pouring all her anger and frustration and grief into creating pieces that spoke of loss and love and survival. Her signature piece was a necklace inspired by her mother, delicate chains that intertwined like a parent's embrace, set with stones that caught the light like tears. She was so focused on her work that she almost missed the dangers creeping closer. Almost. But Gihan didn't miss them. He never missed anything. The first attempt on her life came during a competition event. Someone tampered with the equipment in her workspace, trying to make it look like an accident. She would have died if Gihan hadn't appeared out of nowhere, pulling her back just before a shelf full of heavy tools came crashing down exactly where she'd been standing. "How did you know?" she gasped, her heart hammering in her chest as she stared at the destruction that would have crushed her. He didn't answer. He just looked at her with those intense eyes. And for a moment, she could have sworn she saw fear in them. Real, genuine fear. But then he turned away, barking orders at his security team, and the moment was gone. The second attempt was more subtle, poison in her food at a competition dinner. She took one bite and immediately felt wrong. The world started spinning, her throat closing up, panic clawing at her chest. And again, Gihan was there. He didn't call for help or wait for medical professionals. He simply scooped her into his arms and carried her out of there, moving so fast that the other guests barely had time to register what was happening. She woke up in a hospital room with him sitting beside her bed, his hand wrapped around hers. He didn't notice she was awake at first, too focused on staring at their joined hands, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. He looked exhausted, haunted, like he'd been through his own personal hell and barely survived. "Why?" she whispered, her voice rough from whatever they'd given her to counteract the poison. He jerked like she'd struck him, pulling his hand away from hers so fast you'd think she burned him. The walls came back up immediately, that cold mask sliding into place. "You're valuable," he said flatly. "The Jai family has invested resources in your protection. It would be wasteful to let you die." She should have accepted that explanation. It made sense. Cold, pragmatic sense. But something in his eyes contradicted his words. Something soft and broken and desperately trying to hide. After that, she started paying more attention. She started noticing things she'd missed before, small details that didn't fit the narrative of a cruel, controlling tyrant. Like the way he always ensured her favourite foods were served at dinner, even though she'd never told anyone what her favourites were. Like the way the library in the mansion was stocked with books about jewellery design, including rare volumes she'd mentioned wanting to read in passing conversations she didn't think anyone was listening to. Like the way he stood at his office window at night, staring out at the gardens where she walked when she couldn't sleep, his posture radiating something that looked almost like longing. And then there was the hair tie. That damned braided hair tie she'd made in high school, the one she thought she'd lost 7 years ago. She saw it one day when she barged into his room looking for him, saw it sitting on his dresser like some kind of precious relic, carefully preserved and obviously treasured. "Where did you get that?" she demanded when he came in and found her holding it. For the first time since she'd known him, Gihan looked caught off guard, vulnerable. He stared at that hair tie in her hands like it was the most important thing in the world, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he couldn't quite hide. "You dropped it," he said simply. 7 years ago. I kept it." "Why?" The question came out as barely a whisper. He moved closer, taking the hair tie from her trembling fingers with a gentleness she didn't know he possessed. "Because it was all I had of you," he said, meeting her eyes with an intensity that stole her breath. "Because it reminded me why I was still alive." Before she could ask what he meant, before she could process the implications of his words, alarms started blaring throughout the mansion. Another attack. The Gong family had found a way past the defenses, and this time they weren't being subtle about their intentions. What happened next was chaos. Gunfire and shouting and Gihan pulling her through corridors she didn't know existed, his hand gripping hers so tight it hurt, his body always positioned between her and any potential danger. They ended up in a cold storage facility beneath the mansion, some kind of emergency bunker that was supposed to be safe. But the door malfunctioned, the locks engaged, and the temperature started dropping, and suddenly they were trapped in a freezing room with no way out and no communication with the outside world. "They'll find us," Gihan said, but she could hear the uncertainty in his voice. The temperature was already well below freezing, and it was still dropping. They might not have time for a rescue. Annie wrapped her arms around herself, shivering violently, her breath coming out in visible puffs. Gihan immediately shrugged out of his jacket and draped it around her shoulders, then pulled her against his chest, sharing his body heat without asking permission. "You'll freeze," she protested weakly. "I've survived worse," he said, and there was something in his tone that made her look up at him. That's when she noticed how pale he was, how his hands trembled slightly even as he held her, how his breathing seemed labored, like every breath was a struggle. "Are you sick?" she asked, pressing her hand to his forehead. He was burning up despite the cold, fever hot, dangerously hot. He laughed, and it was the saddest sound she'd ever heard. "Sick," he repeated, like the word was some kind of cosmic joke. "Yes, you could say that." "Gihan, my name isn't Gihan," he interrupted, and suddenly he was pulling away from her, putting distance between them even though they were trapped in a small space. Or rather it is now, but it wasn't always. She watched in confusion as he unbuttoned his shirt with shaking fingers, revealing a chest covered in scars. Not surgical scars, not accident scars. Deliberate vicious wounds that had healed badly, leaving raised tissue and discoloured skin that spoke of trauma that should have been fatal. 16 stab wounds, he said quietly, tracing one of the scars with his finger. "Do you remember 7 years ago in that alley when someone tried to kill you?" The world tilted. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 20 degrees, but she couldn't tell if it was real or just shock freezing her from the inside out. "That's impossible," she whispered. "He died. They told me he died." "I did die, Gihan." "No," Gilindong said, and his eyes were so full of pain and love and desperate hope that she couldn't breathe. "On the operating table for 4 minutes. They brought me back, but I was never the same. The wounds were too severe, the damage too extensive. I've been dying slowly ever since, my organs failing one by one, my body shutting down piece by piece." "No," she said, shaking her head in denial. "No, this doesn't make sense. If you were him, why didn't you tell me? Why did you pretend to be someone else?" He smiled then, and it transformed his entire face. Suddenly she could see the man who'd told her she deserved to live, the stranger who died for a girl he didn't know. Because the man who saved you was Gilindong, the illegitimate son of the Gi family, a nobody with no power and no resources to protect you. But Gihan, the legitimate heir who'd actually died years before in a car accident, Gihan had everything. Wealth, power, an army of people at his command. So I took his identity, I became him, and I used everything he had to build walls around you so high and so strong that no one could ever hurt you again. Tears were streaming down her face, freezing on her cheeks before they could fall. "You've been protecting me all this time, even when I hated you, even when I cursed your name and wished you'd leave me alone." "Especially then," he said softly, reaching out to wipe away her frozen tears with his thumb. "Because you were alive to hate me. You were alive to curse me. You were alive, Annie. And that's all that mattered. I'd do it again," he said without hesitation. 1,000 times over, I'd do it again. Every moment of pain, every year of suffering, every day I watched you from the shadows, wishing I could tell you the truth. It was all worth it to see you live, to see you chase your dreams, to see you become the amazing woman I always knew you would be. She couldn't speak, couldn't think, could only feel the weight of 7 years of sacrifice crushing down on her, the magnitude of a love so deep and so selfless that it literally consumed him from the inside out. "I have a diary," he continued, pulling out a worn leather journal from his pocket. "I've written in it every day since that night, everything about you. Your smiles, your frustrations, your triumphs, your sorrows. I wanted to remember it all. Every moment I got to watch you live the life I gave you." He opened it, and she saw pages filled with her name, her dreams, observations about her jewelry designs, notes about her favorite things. 7 years of devotion documented in ink and paper. 7 years of love given freely without any expectation of return. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked through her tears. "Because we might die here," he said simply. "And I couldn't die, not again, without you knowing the truth. Without you knowing that every moment since that night has been for you. Because of you. Because you made me believe that love could be more than just words. That sacrifice could be more than just death. that protecting someone could be its own kind of purpose. The cold was becoming unbearable now. She could feel it seeping into her bones, slowing her thoughts, making her limbs heavy. But all she could focus on was him. This man who'd been dying for her for 7 years, who'd loved her from the shadows, who'd let her hate him because it meant she was alive to feel anything at all. "I don't want you to die," she said, grabbing his shirt, pulling him closer. "Not for me, not anymore. There has to be another way." "There is," a new voice said, and they both jerked around to see Gong Ming standing in the doorway of the storage room, the malfunctioning door somehow open behind him. Annie's estranged brother, the man torn between family duty and something that might have been love, looked at them with an expression neither could quite read. "There's a cure," Gong Ming continued, stepping into the room, "for the wounds that are killing him. But it requires a sacrifice. A life for a life. That's how the curse works. Someone has to die so he can live." "No," Annie said immediately. "Absolutely not. We'll find another way." "There is no other way," Gong Ming said, but he didn't sound happy about it. "This curse has haunted our families for generations. It demands blood. It always demands blood." Gilindong pulled her closer, his body shielding hers even though the threat wasn't physical. "I won't let anyone die for me," he said firmly. "Not Annie, not anyone. I've made my peace with death." "I haven't," she said fiercely, turning in his arms to face him. "I just found out that the man I thought I hated is actually the man who saved my life. I just discovered that I've been living with a hero who let me call him a villain. You don't get to give up now. You don't get to die after everything you've done to keep me alive." "Annie." "No," she interrupted, pressing her fingers to his lips. "You told me I deserved to live. You told me I deserved to chase my dreams. Well, you deserve that too. You deserve to live. You deserve to finally stop sacrificing yourself. You deserve to be happy." Something in his eyes cracked open, something vulnerable and hopeful and terrified. "I'm happy when you're safe," he whispered against her fingers. "Then I need you to live," she said, her voice breaking, "because I won't be safe without you. I won't be whole. I won't be me. These 7 years, even when I thought I hated you, I felt safer with you watching over me than I ever felt before. You've become part of my life, part of my heart, and I can't lose you. Not now. Not when I finally understand what you mean to me." "What do I mean to you?" he asked, and the hope in his voice was painful to hear. She took a shaking breath. "Everything," she admitted. "You mean everything." Gong Ming cleared his throat, reminding them he was still there. "There might be another way," he said reluctantly. "The curse demands balance, life for life. But what if the life given isn't through death but through binding, through marriage, through the joining of two bloodlines that have been enemies for generations?" "What are you saying?" Gilindong asked, his arms tightening around her protectively.
"I'm saying marry her," Gong Ming said, looking at his sister, at Arnie, with something that might have been regret. "Truly marry her, not the forced arrangement the Gi family planned. Marry her with love, with commitment, with the intention of breaking this curse through unity instead of violence. It's never been tried before, but it might work. It might be enough to satisfy the ancient magic that demands balance." Gilindong looked down at her, and she saw everything in his eyes, hope and fear and love, so deep it hurt to witness. "I was already planning to ask you," he said quietly, "not because of the curse, not because of duty or obligation, but because I love you, because I've loved you since the moment I saw you in that alley. Since the moment I decided your life was worth more than mine." He lowered himself to one knee despite the cold, despite his failing health, despite everything. From his pocket, he pulled out a ring, delicate, beautiful, everything she would have designed herself if she'd had the chance. The band was white gold, set with a perfect sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds arranged like stars. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "Arnie," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "I've watched you for 7 years. I've protected you, provided for you, tried desperately to keep you safe while you hated me for it. I've loved you from the shadows because I didn't think I deserved to love you in the light. But if we survive this, if we find a way to break this curse, I want to spend whatever time I have left loving you the way you deserve to be loved. Openly, honestly, completely. Will you marry me? Not because you have to, not because it's been arranged, but because you choose to, because you want to." She dropped to her knees in front of him, ignoring the cold, ignoring Gongming, ignoring everything but the man in front of her, the man who died for her, who'd lived for her, who'd sacrificed everything and asked for nothing in return. "Yes," she said, and the word came out as a sob. "Yes, I'll marry you. I choose you. I choose us. I choose love over hate, hope over despair, life over this curse that's controlled our families for too long." He slid the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, and then he was kissing her, desperate and gentle and full of 7 years of longing finally released. His lips were cold but soft, and he kissed her like she was precious, like she was everything, like she was worth every scar on his body and every day of his life. When they finally broke apart, both of them gasping, she pressed her forehead to his. "No more secrets," she whispered. "No more shadows. We face everything together from now on." "Together," he agreed, and smiled, really smiled for the first time since she'd known him. Gongming helped them out of the storage facility, and true to his word, he helped them find a cure that didn't require death. It required time, rare ingredients, and magic that had been forbidden for generations. But they had time now. They had hope. They had each other. The wedding that followed wasn't the funeral Arnie had expected. It was a celebration of survival, of love, of two people who'd found each other in the darkness and refused to let go. When she walked down that aisle, she didn't see a cruel devil waiting for her. She saw Gilindong, her savior, her protector, her love, the man who died for her and lived for her and finally got to love her in the light instead of the shadows. Her mother's ashes were returned to her, along with all her keepsakes. The Gong family's curse began to crack under the weight of their love, their choice to unite instead of fight. And she won the jewelry design competition, with a piece inspired by him, 16 interconnected chains representing 16 stab wounds, each one leading to a heart-shaped pendant that symbolized how sacrifice could transform into love. Annie had been forced to marry a cruel devil CEO billionaire. She thought hell awaited her, but the man she married wasn't cruel. He was broken, scarred, dying by inches to keep her alive. And hell wasn't her future. Hell was her past, the time she spent not knowing that the monster she feared was actually the hero she needed, the angel who'd saved her and never stopped saving her even when it cost him everything. Now, with his hand in hers and his ring on her finger and his love finally spoken aloud, she knew the truth. Sometimes the cruelest thing you can do to someone is love them from the shadows, protecting them while they hate you, sacrificing everything while asking for nothing in return. But the most beautiful thing you can do is finally step into the light together, scars and all, and choose love over fear, hope over despair, life over death. This was their story. This was how they learned that devils can be angels in disguise, that monsters are sometimes the most human among us, and that the greatest love stories are written in sacrifice and sealed with a choice. And it all started 7 years ago, with a braided hair tie, 16 stab wounds, and a stranger who decided Arnie deserved to live, even if it meant he had to die. But they didn't die. Neither of them. Against all odds, against the curse, against death itself, they chose to live together. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all.